Welcome to the beginning of our journey through Advent. Advent means coming, and our journey through Advent prepares us to remember the coming of God in the flesh, in Jesus Christ. Eugene Peterson describes it as God moving in to the neighbourhood. But through Advent, we also remember the second coming. We look to anticipate when Jesus will come again, and that's the focus of the reading we heard this morning. When I think of journeys, I'm often reminded of the journeys we have as a family. Often those journeys begin with excitement and possibility, but quite quickly they turn into crisis. For us, it's when it comes to packing the camper van and that moment of transition between being at home and departing, making sure we've got everything packed up, making sure all the doors and windows are closed. This is a point where the children know it's best just to stay out of the way because stress levels are high. Sometimes they'll just go and sit in the van with their headphones on until we're ready to depart. But although that's difficult, often because we're trying to leave early in the morning or late at night, so it's dark, we want the children to be sleeping as we travel, that just intensifies that feeling of crisis. But it's always worth it, because once we get there, once we arrive, it's a time to rest and to reset. It's a time to rejuvenate and to reflect. It's a time to reprioritise. For us, this is what it looked like this summer. Alistair and Rosanna playing on the beach, Scale Beach on the West Mainland in the Orkneys. But I must confess, that is not how I'm feeling right now. At the moment, as the days get shorter and the darkness closes in, I feel really quite different. I'm still recovering post-COVID and I've got some outstanding symptoms, including a cough, which I'm trying really hard to manage. The children continuing at school, but wrestling with the challenge of keeping friendships going in these circumstances. I'm not having seen my parents for a long time now, and that's just our own personal family experience. We look internationally and we see assassinations in Iran. We see President in America questioning the outcome of the democratic elections. In the UK, we see Brexit on the horizon. We see Rishi Sunak with a spending review changing priorities. We see Priti Patel breaking the ministerial code. All of these things just feel overwhelming. One of the things I've used in my workplace to try and make sense of this pathway has been from the Institute of Collective Trauma. And they developed this understanding looking at how communities respond to natural disasters, tsunamis, earthquakes. They talk about the sudden impact. For many of us, that was March and the shutdown. And they talk about a heroic phase. We can overcome this and we can conquer. And then the downward line of leading to disillusionment, an overwhelming sense of loss, that things will not be the same again, knowing that the fundamentals are not going to change. And then a gradual process of up and down, moving towards wiser living. In my work, we've described these phases as the react phase, the restore phase, and the reset phase. And the desire is to want to work in this restore phase, this part here, in a way that's guided by vocabulary and values that will enable us to reset and not just return to things as they were. That journey is one which I also recognise and I've had in mind as I've looked at the passage from Mark 13. Mark's Gospel begins with John the Baptist crying out in the wilderness, "The Messiah is coming, make straight the paths, bring down the mountains, raise up the valleys." That's why Mark is often associated with the lion roaring in the desert. But by the time we get to Mark 13, the darkness has begun to close in for the disciples. Jesus has come in the triumphal entry and is now facing this final week. And in Mark 13, Jesus begins to teach around the anticipation of trauma, collective trauma coming. For many commentators, they think this could be referring to the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. And it could be Mark's community trying to make sense of these events, or it could be Jesus anticipating these events. Either way, the destruction of the temple was a fundamental trauma for Jewish identity and indeed for Christians too. And so in Mark 13, Jesus begins to teach around what the disciples can expect and what they can do. And the first thing they should be doing is watching out. Jesus said to them, watch out. You must be on your guard. So be on your guard. Be on your guard and be alert. Because you can read in the text, they should be on their guard against people who will deceive them and false prophets who will come and mislead them with false teaching. Because in the darkness and the disillusionment, we are much more in danger of that. But they should also be watching out for the coming of the Son of Man, the one who will bring to completion the work that has begun. And so too should we in our own places of darkness and crisis. Isaiah 64 is again somebody writing in a place of darkness and crisis, and they're crying out in the first few verses for God to act in miraculous powers as he has done in the past. But then we see in verse 4, this is the God who works for those who wait for him. That theme of waiting is throughout the Psalms for those in crisis. Wait on the Lord, be of good courage. It's those that wait upon the Lord who shall inherit the earth. I waited patiently for the Lord, and he inclined unto me and heard my cry. We need to recognise that these are times of crisis, but we also need to see the hope. Mark 13 is an example of apocalyptic literature. Phrases like, we don't know the time and when these events will come. But in the heart of apocalyptic literature is encouragement and hope. What looks like devastation and defeat will be God's victory. Out of the turmoil and confusion that surrounds the destruction of the temple, there will be a new presence of God. We see that in the reading Shona and Rosanna did with a reference to the fig tree. The parable of the fig tree is mentioned earlier in Mark, a link to a judgment and the destruction of the temple, and yet here it becomes a sign of new hope in unexpected places, because out of suffering and death, the Messiah will bring new life. After the cross comes resurrection, not resurrection in all its fullness for us now, because that is something for which we still wait. In the now, we take up our cross to watch and to wait and to stay alert. As we begin our Advent journey, we anticipate remembering the one who comes into the manger, the place of dirt and, for some, despair, the place of lowliness, and yet we don't see that. We see the King arrive. We see the Prince of Peace. And so we are encouraged by Jesus in times of crisis to watch and to wait and to stay alert and to anticipate his coming. But often what I really want to do is just hide. And the duvet's calling. If I just hide for long enough, it will all go away. And with children, hiding under the duvet can be fun, but often for us, we're hiding out of fear and shame as we come to terms with what we have done and how we are responding in this time. This image is taken from a video by Rob Bell called Lump. Google it. It's provocative and it's worth watching. But that's not what Jesus is saying when he says watch and wait. We can also respond with anxiety and anger, which can lead to denial and distraction. But Jesus is not telling us to come out and fight. He's telling us to watch and be alert. Because Jesus' command is that we should keep awake. at the end of chapter 13, and what I say to you, I say to all, keep awake. This is not the time to hide under the duvet. This is not the time to try and pretend the crisis is not happening. This is the time to recognise the darkness and therefore to watch. To watch out for those signs of new growth like the blossom on the fig tree, to watch out for the coming of the one who will bring it to completion. This is the time to wait upon the Lord, not in inactivity, but in a desire to react, to restore and to reset. For now is the time that we can work together in ways that will see the darkness transformed. Just as the manger is transformed, just as the cross is transformed, so too we can work. But to do that, we must keep awake. My prayer as we begin this Advent journey is that we will stay awake as we prepare to remember the coming of the one who brings hope and peace. And we will also do so mindful that he will return and he will bring to completion the work that he has begun in you, in me, and in all creation. Let's watch and wait and stay awake together. Amen.